face in it and then see.
No.
Let's see. I think it is.
Want me to get on Facebook and see?
It absolutely is going. Oh, great.
Oh yeah, I got the notification.
Okay, Rebecca just lied. All right.
Says her face like.
I'm old enough that I don't care. All right. We're going to talk about the second part of this. So we just spoke about the traditional Western medical and philosophical view. And now we're going to talk about the traditional Eastern view. So just as the Western view is of the human body as a machine that we fix, now there's exceptions, there's individuals, but in general, Western view was that the parts of our body were basically replaced and fixed, and that you could treat things in isolation. And now we're looking at the Eastern view, and the Eastern view and the traditional view in general views the human body as a garden. Yeah. So as something that we cultivate and that we care for and that we assist in the health process. So how many of you have heard before people that work with energy or people that work with massage therapy, they work with in the healing arts? Have you heard them say before that they're not a healer, that they just assist you in healing your own body? Okay. So this comes from that same view, that it is just like we're approaching the human body and approaching the person we're working with, the way that a gardener would approach the garden. So if we have plants in our garden that are having a difficult time, we need to add additional nutrients. We might need to make sure that we are either changing the environment around it or we are stimulating the plants to grow and that we're cultivating their health. We may even want to kind of shape the way that they're growing, right? So if we have tomato plants, we might actually use a stake or use some sort of support to help them grow right. I remember, if we're looking at this way, there was a time where I noticed my basil plants in my backyard that they would, I could have just read about this, but I noticed that they would start to go to seed, they start to flower. And if I would just pinch off the top every night, that they would continue to grow and they would continue to stay like youthful, and that they would continue to be vibrant. And so in many ways, if we are looking at the human body in this way, with this connection to nature, we find that there are truths there too. We're going to find truths no matter where we look. You look deeply into a certain area and you are going to find truths within it. So that's why it is important to not just buy into one system, but actually look at the Eastern system. They delve deeply into our subjective experience, into the pain that we feel, into the emotions that we have. And then the Western medical system delving deeply into what is objective, what we can all see and feel and agree upon. Both of those are valid, and they looked in different areas, and when we look in these specific areas, we find different things. Yes?
What do you mean by truth?
What do you mean by truth?
Yeah, truth.
That it's something effective that helps us to live a healthier life. Yeah. So, when we look at these things, so for example, if we looked at my basil plant and the way that providing a little bit of stimulation, and as they started to flower each night, if I would just pinch off the top, how they would continue to grow. This is not unlike making sure that we engage in exercise, making sure that we stimulate the body when we do perform therapies, even massage therapy or glossa type things, scraping techniques. We're providing just enough stimulation to the body that we keep it youthful, that we help stimulate growth when we learn things. Anytime that we are providing that type of stimulation, there's a little bit of, tiny bit of micro trauma that happens, right? Like sometimes when we learn things, there's a moment where it could feel a little painful. Sometimes when we exercise, there's a moment where there's a little bit of strain. But if we use that in the right way, right? If we use it in the right way, we stimulate our own healing and our own growth. Those are things that are effective. These are effective. These are helpful. Okay. So, in the I Ching, which is a Chinese book, ancient Chinese book, the I Ching has a quote that says, "Everything observable by the senses is subject to change, and therefore in motion. There are interlocking cycles of change. One cannot bid the winds and waves to cease, but one can learn to navigate treacherous currents by conducting ourselves in harmony with the prevailing processes of transformation, and thus weather the storms of life." So, it is, in many ways, about learning to adapt and change to what's going on. So, with our bodies, if we find that we're in an environment that is providing too much stimulation, so we start feeling stressed, what would be a good solution to that? Yeah, remove yourself. Start taking time for meditation, time in nature, and calmness. And if you cannot leave that environment, then you would find and create an internal rest. Right? So if you're in a very stressful environment and you don't have a way to leave, you still could go inside yourself and find that peace and calmness to balance the intensity around you. Okay? So the East looked for ways to balance these types of things and to adapt to the environment so that you could have a healthy life, a healthy body, a healthy mind. And looked at it from the perspective of cultivating, not fixing. All right, so all life occurs within the circle of nature, according to Eastern thought. So we are intrinsically connected to nature and to our environment. So nature is a matrix in which all things are connected. So for example, cameras, trees, which were introduced into our region, what did they do? Yeah, they overtook, so we brought them in to pull up the riverbanks. And that seemed like a really good idea, because they do that. But then they suck up water. That was so much water, and live in the desert. So that's a very dangerous thing. In Hawaii, they brought in mongooses. Mongoose? Is there a photo of that? Mongoose. And they thought this would be a good idea. And yeah, and it ended up affecting not just, I think they wanted to have mongoose come in and eat rats or something. So there was something that they wanted. They thought the mongoose would provide for them. And they did that, but then they also attacked other animals, and they also bred like crazy. And so that ended up being a bad idea. When we introduced antibiotics, and it was, there were many good things that came from antibiotics, but when we began to overuse antibiotics, what types of side effects have we had? So we've had superbacteria, we've had, yeast infections, antibiotic-resistant bacteria. We've had, what? Yeah, and sometimes can affect your immune system. So there's a number of things that have happened from that. When we looked at just treating one thing without looking at the unintended consequences and what it would do to the whole. So Eastern medicine is geared towards looking at the whole, the entire body, the mind, body, and spirit. So in traditional Chinese medicine, human beings, we represent the junction or meeting place between heaven and earth. So it's said that we have this, we have a reliance on both things in heaven, so in the universe, and also in our environment that we're in right now. And so there's a book called Between Heaven and Earth that is a very good book that talks extensively about this. And the title comes from this idea that human beings occupy the space between heaven and earth. So traditional Chinese medicine teaches that to harm a part is to harm the whole. To do good to one part is to do good to the whole. So, and then to hurt one part, to do bad, something bad to part of the body or the mind, the entire body. And so, for example, when we were talking about pain medication, that when we shut down our mind and we shut down our ability to feel pain, just completely shut it down, that from an Eastern medical standpoint, that's a very bad idea because it severs our connection and it severs our ability to perceive things accurately. And so from an Eastern medical standpoint, it is a much better idea to be able to work with going in and feeling where that pain is and learning to soften to it so that your mind actually is connected to your body and you're actually able to let that go. It's a very conscious process. And that's a much better way to approach it than by just taking a pill which severs the connection. Because the unintended consequence of severing the connection is that not only do you not get better and your pain does not really resolve, but then you develop dependency on this painkiller that you began to take. So you have psychological and emotional and physical dependency going on as well as pain at this point. All right, so traditional Chinese medicine draws heavily from a book called the Huangdi Jing. This is an ancient medical text. It's believed to have been written during the Chinese Warring States period, so 475 to 221 BC, and the early Han period, 206 BC to 220 CE. So it was a long time period. And it is, I think I have that book right here.
How is that spelled?
Huangdi Jing. So here's a translation of part of it. The Huangdi Jing. And Huangdi translates as the Yellow Emperor. So this is the Yellow Emperor's classic of medicine. And it is essentially a study where physicians were commissioned to go out and do research and then report back. And so when you read it, it is the Yellow Emperor. It's written sort of in this like question-answer format for some of it, where the Yellow Emperor will ask this physician, and again, I don't speak Chinese, so there'll be a massacre of the names, but Kibo, and he'll say, Kibo, what does it mean, when this happens or that happens? So, for example, with speaking about yin yang, in the Huangdi Jing, it reads, Huangdi said, I understand that heaven and the sun are considered yang, and earth and the moon are considered yin. Because of the natural movement of heaven and earth and the sun and moon, we experience a change of long months and short months and go through 365 days, which form 1 year in the Chinese calendar. The energy flow within the human body through the channels corresponds to this. Can you elaborate further? So see how it's constantly looking for the way in which we're connected? So I understand that the world and the universe work this way. Can you tell me how the human body works that way? And so because that's where they're looking, that's where they find information. So let's read one more little paragraph. Kibo answered, the reaches of heaven and earth and yin and yang are vast. And ultimately, everything in the universe can be classified into polarity of yin and yang. Yin and yang are not absolute, but their principle never changes. The law that governs does not falter, although everything around it changes according to the point of reference. So, laws are stable, but things change around the laws all the time, thus creating exceptions.
But there is a constant law that everything fits in the yin and yang, just because in Western medicine they look at laws as absolute.
Yeah.
Even in Eastern medicine, there are laws that are absolute, but the things that fall underneath them can be
Changeable.
changed.
Yeah, so as we start to look at yin and yang, there's many, many ways that it's very interesting to look at because when something becomes too yang, it then becomes yin. When you have something yang, you can divide it into ways in which it is very yin, And so it is this interplay and this way of looking at the acceptance while still maintaining a platform, still maintaining some truth. So, but creating truths in a way where they acknowledge all of the exceptions and all the ways in which they can be viewed differently. So,
On a universal level.
what?
I said it's on a universal
Yeah.
level rather than a just strictly physical.
Right, yeah, good. Okay. So, for example, before the birth of all things and creatures above ground, the living potential resided in the place of yin. This is called yin within yin. Once it was born and appeared above ground, this phenomenon was called yang within yin. It was after birth or post-heaven that the yang qi enabled everything to grow. So it constantly talks about the interplay of these two ideas. And when you're talking about yin and yang, there are some very, I mean, the whole thing is incredibly interesting, but there are some very interesting concepts with it. For example, there is the idea that yin is stronger than yang. So that's like, with some exceptions, kind of a truth, right? So there's exceptions to it still, but yin is stronger than yang.
Was there more
And-
yang than yin?
Is there-
Balance out?
No, not necessarily, but it would be yang plays out in the short term. They're just different. So yang plays out in the short term, and yin plays out over time. So if you're talking about something like a yang will versus a yin will, your yang will would be what you think you want to do. So you think you want to do that, and you go and you set out and do it. And then yin will would be like looking back over some time, how things actually played out. And that would be the true path that you followed. Only after looking back at it, you'd be like, okay, that was my yin will. That was what I was actually doing. These were the choices I was making each time.
So when we say hindsight is 20/20, that's really saying the end.
Yeah,
Looking back.
yeah, that would be yin playing out over time. But with the will, it would be saying that what you actually did, because you have to make choices each time to respond to this. So it's not as harsh as, it's not a judgment, but it's just saying that kind of that was your path. That it's like trusting that each time you had a choice that you made that led you there, that this is almost really where you're supposed to be, because it was your life path. And it's viewing it from a bigger perspective, right? Because someone could be defensive and be like, that's not what I want to do. I never wanted that to happen, right? So you could go there, but it's kind of from like a larger perspective of over time, the lessons you learn. If you're looking at life as lessons that we're learning, then it becomes a little more chill, right? And it doesn't make, if something bad happens in your life, it doesn't mean that the thing that happened is okay and good, and that we have to have learned something from it and our life is better because of it, because that's not always the case. But when those bad things happen, right, those things that are hard happen, and you continue on, many times you are still okay in spite of that thing not being okay, right? And so you make another choice, another choice, another choice, and that over time shows your true will. It shows really what you did and how you responded to each thing in life. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the Huang Di Neijing, and you'll all want to know the name of this. It is on your file. And it is sort of the canon of Chinese medicine. So the role of the physician and the role of a massage therapist too in traditional medicine is to regulate qi. So just as a planet's healthy atmosphere allows for life, qi allows for and creates a healthy atmosphere for life for humans. So qi is our atmosphere. So qi is the movement, qi